What's going on, everybody? Welcome into the Hoop Hogs video mailbag. I'm Curtis Wilkerson with Inside Arkansas and the pod at the Palace, coming to you today with another Arkansas basketball-related Q&A. Let's see what we've got from Generic Sports Fan. Nice name there on X. He says, Cal's teams at Kentucky tended to start slow but pick up around January. How long will it take for this team to gel and find their groove and settle into roles? It's a good question. And I think on the surface, like the 40,000 foot view, you could look at it and say, like new surroundings, brand new team. This thing might take a while to figure out. And maybe that's going to be the case, but there are some differentiating factors that make me wonder. Now, Cal is going to preach this thing until he turns blue in the face. Like it's one of his favorite lines is, "Hey, this ain't now what it's going to be in March. You know, what you see now is not what you're going to get later." He very much embraces the process, I think. But let's think about it a little bit. Talking about the slow starts for Kentucky in the past, I think part of it is schedule related because like we can see from Arkansas this year, like they play in a lot of those marquee like one-off neutral site matchups. So I've got the KenPom pages pulled up, but like, last year they lost to Kansas early in the season. They had that weird one to UNC Wilmington at Rupp Arena, if you guys remember that. And then they kind of struggled out of the gates in SEC play with A&M beating them, South Carolina beating them, Florida and Tennessee got them fairly early there. They were also very banged up and very injured. Like they didn't have their full roster for the longest. They didn't have any big men to start the year. So that was a little bit different. A couple years ago, like if you look at their early season losses, Michigan State, Gonzaga, UCLA, like those are some pretty tough matchups. The year before, Duke and Notre Dame. So some of it's schedule based, I think. I do believe that like the hiccups for Arkansas under Cal are going to be different than they were for Muss. Whereas you're probably right. Like that, I think they'll come early and then they'll just gradually progress and get better throughout the course of the season, as opposed to maybe getting off to a good start and then having the weird, month of January and then playing a lot better. Those things are always strange to me. I think the other part of this to consider, like it's going to be a little bit difficult to look back at what he did at Kentucky in terms of how it's going to play out at Arkansas, because this is a completely different roster construction based on what we've seen from John Calipari in the past. They relied so heavily on those one and done freshmen in the past. And so it kind of makes sense that they would get out to a slow start as those guys adjust to the college game, the speed of the game. How do they handle the physicality? When do things slow down for them? When do they get comfortable just running a college system, defending grown men, right? And so everybody has their own learning curve, but it takes a little while to settle in. They're not going to be so reliant on youth this season. They got some young guys, obviously, that they need to be really good in Boogie, Carter Knox, Billy Richmond. But they've also got some guys who are experienced under Cal at Kentucky. They went out and got some, grad transfer, high-level transfer portal additions to come in and help. So is that going to streamline the process? Like, are they going to be able to avoid the hiccups? I wouldn't necessarily go as far as to say that. I think they just might be a little bit different. Like instead of the youthful mistakes that you might see early on, it might be more about those guys gelling and coming together with their continuity and everything like that. As far as selling into roles and finding their groove, that's the other interesting part about this roster construction, because we talk about like, Cal didn't bring in 7 freshmen this year. It's a pretty balanced roster between guys who played for him before, experienced transfers, and youth. But it's also very different in terms of the rotation is already kind of defined, right? That was one of his biggest deals was, hey, I feel like I had too many mouths to feed last season, too many guys to coach. I want it to be very, very clear, the line of delineation in my rotation. I want 8 or 9 guys, and the rest of them, hey, if they work their way in the rotation, cool. But we're hand picking the guys that we think are going to be key parts of this operation. So they went out and got 9. And so that's already decided. Now that comes at risk, right? That means like you got to be really good with your evaluations. You can't miss on anybody. Like you can't have a freshman come in who's not ready to contribute right away. You can't have a transfer come in that flops or busts or doesn't meet your expectations. So it's really, really important that Arkansas hit on all of these guys or a vast majority of these guys. Otherwise, you run into a little bit of a problem because you don't have anyone really to turn to. but you know who those guys are going to be. And so that part of the equation in terms of who's going to play is pretty much already decided. So it's tinkering with the other things, like what are the best lineup combinations for this team? Like who works best together as a starting unit? Do you have certain guys who are really strong off the bench, like Trevor Brazile, for example? He was arguably Arkansas's best player early in that season before he got hurt. He didn't start a single game. He came off the bench. He really thrived in that role. Do they have guys who fit that mold, who plays well together? And it's sometimes it's not always about having your best five, but the five who work the best together on the floor. What are you looking for in your second unit? Muss always like to look down at the bench. He say it all the time and know that, hey, like if my offense isn't clicking early, I've got a guy who I know can be instant offense that I can put in and score right away. Like what is Cal looking for from that standpoint? What's the shot distribution look like? I think we all agree that like Nelly Davis is probably going to be their go-to guy, but who else are they trying to feed? Who emerges? You talk about roles. Like I think we know the roles of like who's going to play, but what is their role going to be on the floor? Like who are the shooters? Who are the guys who are the late clock options? What are they doing in terms of looking for post-ups or getting the bigs involved? It'll be things like that. Who's your closing lineup? That's more important than your starting lineup, quite honestly. Who are the five guys that you can put out there who are going to defend at the level that you're looking to defend? And everybody has different types of chemistries and strengths. Like which group can you put out there that's where the ball's not going to stick, where it continues to move and you got free flow and some rhythm to your offense with good spacing without getting clunky. So all those decisions are going to have to be had. And from that standpoint, if I really think about it, I would imagine that Arkansas is going to take some lumps early in ways because of that schedule. It's tough, man. I'm really glad that they're doing these exhibitions with Kansas and TCU because you're not going to be surprised by anything after that point. But still, I mean, when you're traveling, whether it's neutral site or on the road, and you're playing, the Baylors, the Illinois, the Michigans, the Miamis of the world, you're going to be tested, and there's probably going to be some hiccups there. But the goal is always to hit your stride come SEC play. And I think that this team is going to be able to do that. We'll see how quick it comes together. A lot of people have talked about the continuity being a factor, more so than they're too young or whatever. I think it's a little bit overblown. I've said that because it's a new setting for Coach Cal. It's a new setting for those guys who came with him from Kentucky, but they know what to expect. Like the foundation of what he's trying to do hasn't changed. The schemes aren't going to change that much. Those guys are familiar with him and the coaching staff. So there's a foundation laid, I think, for the type of culture you want to have in your program already. Guys who understand the ropes under Cal. Then you got Trevor Brazile, who's familiar with the area and everything like that. It's a decent mix. So I think that part of it's a little bit underblown. I think there will probably be a game or two early in the season where we're going, oh man, these dudes got some work to do. But like you alluded to, and like Cal's certainly going to allude to, what you see early is not what you're going to see late. And I do like the makeup of this group in terms of figuring it out without having to take a bunch of huge lumps in SEC play. The other factor of that for Arkansas is the SEC schedule, which I think plays out pretty well from that regard. Now you open at Tennessee, so that's kind of a beast, but you have a good stretch of winnable games early on in SEC play. Then you've got that gauntlet stretch kind of in the middle where you've got like you're at Kentucky and at Texas and you get Bama at home. It's a pretty brutal stretch there, but you also close in a lot more favorable fashion with a bunch of winnable games as opposed to, you guys remember a couple years ago when I think they were like at Tennessee, at Alabama, and they played home at Kentucky to close the year. That's crazy. At least you have that kind of stretch in the middle of SEC play as opposed to the end of it. So I think the ebbs and flows of the schedule help a little bit from that regard too, but there's still a lot of unknowns. And Arkansas is going to be the center of attention in the college basketball world to see how this entire thing works out. I'm pretty optimistic about it. But I understand those who are skeptical and wondering, how long is it going to take for this group? I've seen a lot of people say that, from a national talking heads perspective, that they feel like this is a very, very good Arkansas team, one that should be playing really good ball at the end of the year, could be a factor in the NCAA tournament and everything like that. But a lot of people are pointing to year two as the year where they could maybe really do something special. why wait, man? This is a, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's a, what have you done for me lately society. And people want instant gratification. And I think this team is talented enough to do something pretty cool. So hopefully they figure it out sooner rather than later. But I appreciate the question, generic sports fan. And hey, keep them coming, folks. This one came from a Twitter DM. So you can throw them my way there. My profile, I've got this thread pinned, the Hoop Hogs video mailbag at Kurt Wilkerson _. You can hop into the comments there. If you watch these videos on YouTube, you can throw your questions in those comments. We're going to get to them. And we post one of these every day at 8 a.m. So make sure you get subscribed to our YouTube page at Inside Arkansas, and follow along with our playlist. We got the Hoop Hogs video mailbag playlist where you can find every single one of these, and they're evergreen. Like, if you miss one and you realize a few days later, oh man, I didn't get to it, you can always go back. These things are going to be playable up until the start of the season. So it's all good, but appreciate you guys as always. I'm going to get out of here and we're going to be back tomorrow. It's been Curtis Wilkerson with Inside Arkansas and the pod at the Palace, and we'll see you soon.